How's it going, everybody? I am Bryan Beck. This is our flight scenario presentation for Aviation 327. So today we are told that we needed to take our boss and her family on a minimum of a 250 mile trip, and that we're supposed to pick the destination. So I used my home airport of KTZR there, which is basically Columbus, Ohio, just right outside of it. And the trip I planned goes up to Buffalo, New York. 270 miles is the total trip. And again, we're flying our boss, her husband, and their young daughter to a golf tournament. And we'll be taking off about an hour before sunset. Now, in this case, ourselves, the pilot, we've got 275 hours. We're a pretty freshly minted commercial pilot. We are IFR rated, and we've got 10 hours of actual time, and we are current. That doesn't necessarily say we are proficient, but we're at least current. Our last flight with passengers was 95 days ago, although we are not told if that what we're at in regards to nighttime, but we'll break that down in a minute. The aircraft we're flying is a Piper Archer. It's IFR certified, although it does not have any oxygen equipment, and it's not FEE certified, no anti or de-ice equipment on board. And we have 175 hours experience in that aircraft. The environment, we're calling it VFR for the first 100 miles, degrading to IFR upon arrival into Buffalo, and we're taking off 1 hour before sunset. So this is mostly going to be a night flight. Okay, so I cheated a little bit. Normally when you're sitting down with a DPE or something along those lines, you're going to have lots of maps and charts and printed out weather briefing and handwritten nav logs and all of that handwritten calculations right in front of you so they know what you're talking about. I cheated a little bit and I used ForeFlight for everything for this scenario. But the data we're going to be looking through is exactly the same. So taking a look at the METARs and the TAF along the route of our flight, it's actually pretty similar to what the scenario is calling for. We're going to be taking off VFR. We're going to have a pretty healthy tailwind up at 7,000 feet on the way there. And it's going to slowly but surely get worse by the time we get to Buffalo. In the real world, we're calling for ceilings broken at 25 and some pretty good winds getting in there. In the scenario, we are talking about coming up to an overcast ceiling of 800 feet and visibility at 2 miles. So we can just go ahead and assume that we were planning on this in the TAF, but it ended up being a whole lot worse back there. Here's our winds aloft table. We're going to have a pretty healthy tailwind about 30 knots behind us all the way there, so that'll help with travel time. Okay, here's the downside that we're getting from our weather briefing today. There's IFR air mets for the region that we're flying into, as well as some icing air mets that we're going to have to be careful of. Now, these specify that the icing air met spans from the freezing level, which is the surface, up to 16,000 feet. We're obviously going to be flying in that range since we don't have oxygen, so that's something to concern ourselves with. And then our external pressures for the flight. We're going to be flying the woman that we hope to be our future employer. She's trying to get to a golf tournament that she really doesn't want to miss. And the other major one is that the daughter in the back of the airplane becomes airsick just 40 minutes into the flight, which is just shy of halfway through from light turbulence. We'll talk about what we can do about that. Okay, so red flags out of the scenario. Obviously, we need to talk about our fuel and our flight planning. It's a pretty long trip, so we need to make sure we're prepared for it. Night currency, we're taking off an hour before sunset. It's going to be a 2-hour flight, so if we get lucky and the tailwind's a little stronger than we needed it to, we actually might land. Or no, that wouldn't be the case. We're going to be landing at night, so we need to make sure that we're night current. The child in the back seat is going to get airsick 40 minutes into the flight, so we need to be prepared for that. once we get into the New York area, there's going to be some icing conditions and pretty strong winds at Buffalo. And then, of course, we've got our external pressures of wanting to say yes and wanting to get there because your would-be future boss wants to be there. Okay, so let's talk about flight planning. First, we went through the weight and balance. We've got 3 passengers today and 125 pounds of baggage. I added an extra 30 pounds to the baggage compartment for my stuff, my flight bag, extra oil, rags, cleaning solutions, stuff like that. And that puts us pretty close to the top of the envelope for us. I've got about a 30-pound margin there, which I'll make sure I leave in. We're taking 36 gallons of fuel out of 48 possible. We only need 20 for the trip, so that gives us an hour and a half fuel reserve, which is great. Especially considering the weather we're about to fly into. But I'm leaving that extra 30 pounds in there because, you know, somebody might bring something extra that weighs more than they said it did, or maybe they weigh more than they say they did. But we've got a little bit of room for margin for error in there. Okay, here's our nav log. This has got us going the 270-mile trip on 20 gallons of fuel. We've got a 29-knot tailwind, so it's going to take us just shy of 2 hours to get there. Pretty quick for Cherokee. One thing we mentioned was night currency. Do we have our 3 takeoff and landings to a full stop at night in the last 90 days? The scenario doesn't specify, but if not, then we need to make sure we go up the night prior to this trip and get those in so we're legal to take this flight. The other major one, and this is kind of a strange one, is the kid's going to get airsick 40 minutes into the flight. We're not even halfway at this point. And it says that the child's getting airsick because of light turbulence. Light turbulence, maybe we just need a different altitude. Maybe we descend to 5,000 or climb to 9,000 to get away from the turbulence. The higher you go, the closer you get to hypoxia. Like in this scenario, we don't have any oxygen on board the airplane, so we need to be careful of that. You can't go too high. Do you need to divert? There's plenty of airports along the way, plenty of places you could stop and get some help for the kiddo. But realistically, depending on the severity of the situation, I would rely on what the parents are saying about it. One of them is going to be sitting in the back seat with the kid. Maybe it's something that happens regularly to the child and they know how to soothe the kid. Or maybe not. Maybe it's a new phenomenon and you need to get back on the ground immediately. Your parents are going to have a much better idea of how to deal with that than you will. And if they feel like they need to get on the ground, then you get them on the ground. Or you turn back, whatever they decide is necessary. Obviously, if it's posing a safety to your passengers or the flight in general, you're going to go ahead and divert. Weather is the big nasty one in this case. Looking through the looking at the icing areas specifically, that's going to be the no-go for us. The TAF that we brought up earlier shows that the weather's going to be pretty reasonable once we get to our destination. The METAR we're looking at from the scenario shows 800 overcast and 2-mile visibility. We're going to Buffalo, New York. They've got an ILS to either of the 2 runways that work well with the winds we're going to be dealing with. Both of them we can get in. The minimums are lower than the actual conditions that prevail at Buffalo, so we could get in there. The scenario doesn't necessarily specify whether or not we are proficient as an instrument student, although instrument pilot, sorry. We've only got 10 hours of actual time, so I would assume not. That's kind of a hairy situation to take your future boss into. That's something you would probably rather practice with an instructor. And then we've got our external pressures. Our future boss wants to get there for a golf event. You want to make it happen so you can make a good impression. But realistically, if you're deeming that you're going to run into icing conditions in a Cherokee, which is not FIGI certified, the safe bet is going to say, no, we can't make this flight. If you want to make a good impression for them, you might want to start thinking about alternative travel for them. maybe find a charter service that's got a Navajo or something that can get them in there, or a Malibu that can get them in there through the weather. Try to organize things so you don't have to cancel their trip, but you don't have to risk their lives to get them there. That's going to make a greater impression than taking them into pretty nasty weather. But that's everything I've got. Thank you.